Hey everyone, I'm Samantha Heuwagen, and I am the author of the Starless series. Today I'm reading you a little excerpt from the first book in the series, Down Among the Stars. So here we go. Driving the fastest I've ever driven, I passed mile after deserted mile. The roads were clear except for the occasional abandoned car on the side of the road. The usually bustling buildings looked like ghost towns. Some had boards bolted to glass windows and doors, while others hadn't fared so well. Shattered glass sparkled, catching the rays of light from the morning sun like diamonds. Forgotten trash swirled in the wind as I passed. Once free of the urban areas, the scene changed to peaceful farms and tree lines in perfectly straight formation, their leaves swaying in the breeze. The drive normally took me 3 hours, with Lansing being the halfway point. At this speed, I made it to Lansing within 45 minutes. The muscles in my neck relaxed as I pictured my grandparents' farmhouse. I loosened my grip on the wheel, watching as the color crept back into my fingertips. I'd made it outside of Portland in just over an hour when a loud bang filled my ears. Shocked, I swerved, barely missing the parked car to my right. I slammed on my brakes, their screeches piercing the air. Trying to regain control of the car, I landed in the ditch. My anxiety made its mighty comeback as the dust and debris settled. Dang it, I thought as a loud pop rang out, even louder overhead. I ducked out of instinct, the sound vibrating through my bones. It felt closer than before. The echo was ringing in my chest. I sat up straight to see where the noise originated. I was surprised and surrounded by wide open farmland for miles. Nothing seemed out of place. The hairs on my arm rose as the sick feeling of dread took hold. Tilting my head slightly to rest on the cold glass of my driver's side window, I lifted my eyes to the sky. Filled with the bright lights and smoke, it was no longer the beautiful blue Michigan sky painted with white fluffy clouds, but a horrible mixture of darkness and explosions. The shielders had said the shielders had said the fighting wouldn't take place on Earth if they could help it, but there was darkness in Earth's atmosphere, making me think they'd obviously failed. Looking closer, I realized it wasn't a black hole at all, but a huge ebony spaceship. Neon beams shot out from the ship, colliding with different targets. The giant black hole in the sky was created to destroy exactly what the Timortians wanted. Dozens of tiny blue ships dotted the horizon. I could barely see the other little ships, the shielders, I supposed, flying around the big ebony ship. Their ships left me with little confidence they would beat the monstrosity in the sky. Little balls of burning smoke made their way up toward the action. I watched enough History Channel specials to realize they were nuclear warheads being sent to help. How much good they would do, I didn't know, but I wasn't going to stay around to find out. I put the car back into drive and took off again like a bat out of hell. Give 'em hell, I thought. Far off over the horizon, bits and pieces of fallen alien ships fell to the ground. I knew that things would get worse before they get better. This was a fight for our planet. This was war, but my heart sank as the alien threat crept closer. I pushed the gas pedal down harder and focused on my driving, ignoring the shock threatening to consume my whole body as it waited at the back of my throat. Another loud whistling noise enveloped my ears. Forced back to reality, I immediately slammed on the brakes. A huge mangled piece of ship, a crushed wing, sped toward me. Trying to gauge where it would fall, I put the car in park and scrambled out. My eyes never left the burned metal as I forced my body into motion, the ship falling closer and closer. The roaring of the ship descended toward me, making me cover my ears. I struggled to move away from my car fast enough to avoid the inevitable impact. Parts of the ship began to litter the ground, one piece heading in my direction. I ran to the other side of the road, rolling into the median as the debris landed on my car with a bang. Fire and scrap metal shot everywhere. I raised my head slightly, still covering the vulnerable parts of my neck as I watched in horror. The rest of the ship landed with a crash in a deserted field about a mile away. It exploded upon impact, turning into a pile of ash and twisted metal. Its final resting place was a giant hole. I stayed low, frozen in place. My body started to go into shock, but I fought against the instinct and pushed myself to stay present, although my body was screaming to run away. I shivered against the dampness of the grass, but I pushed myself onto my hands and knees, barely able to move my legs, forcing them to do what I wanted. Standing, I brushed myself off, looking around to make sure nothing was coming toward me. Burning flames caught my eye. My car was totaled, a smoldering pile of metal now. My heart skipped a beat as I tried not to be sick. My mind quickly turned to the ship. What remained of the ship burned brightly. I could feel the heat coming off of it, the smoke intensifying. The markings on the side were intact, some of it recognizable, definitely a shielder ship. I let out a sigh of relief, erasing the taste of bile from my mouth. Gracias a Dios. Unsure of what I'd find in the wreckage, I went against my better judgment, deciding to walk towards the burning pile of junk. It couldn't hurt to check for survivors. They might need my help, I reasoned, inching toward the burning ship. I quickened my pace into a run where the damage was most prominent. The remains of one burning body caught my eye. My stomach turned in on itself as I fought the urge to puke, waiting for my breathing to slow and the feeling of vertigo to pass before I continued onward. I coughed, trying to release the taste of burning flesh, my lungs already full of the smell. I found another twisted body still breathing, but I was too late to help. The creature's back had folded in on itself, its limbs flattened to the ground. Black blood poured from a wide cut along its stomach. It took its last breath as I knelt down beside it. Silent tears fell down my cheeks, the grotesque scene flooding my vision. I pushed myself to keep looking for more survivors. Further away, I saw another one. The hump of the body appeared to be in better shape than the others. I ran over to see if it was still alive. The lump of limbs and bloody fabric distorted my view. It was dressed differently, yet somehow I could manage to make out the rise and fall of its chest. Its tangled hair was matted into the bun on its it was matted into the burn on its cheek. Although it was bleeding heavily from its left shoulder, with more burns on the side of its body, the shielder's injuries didn't appear life-threatening. I looked around for something to stop the bleeding. I needed to find the source of the blood, but it was hard to see without moving the shielder. I was beginning to lose confidence in myself as a makeshift nurse. Reaching out slowly to the nearest limb, I placed my hand on the body. I allowed my other hand to hover over the mess, trying to find a spot where I could move the creature without further harm. Running out of time, I pushed it with all the strength I could to attempt to turn it on its side. The shielder growled, making my heart stop. I jumped backwards, lifting my hand away, raising them high enough to show I meant no harm. I'm so sorry, I told it, hoping it spoke English. I know you're hurt, but I need to try to get you somewhere safe. This really isn't a good place to stop. Let me help you. We've got to get out of here. I tried again. It seemed to help me this time. When I finally got it on its back, it relaxed a little more. My name is Cayanades. I'm a friend. I'm going to try to help you. A low humming sound cut off my train of thought. Two ships were coming towards us, not too far off the horizon. They were small and long, flying fast and low. The cockpit seemed to be the only recognizable thing on them. The rest of the bodies were just thin wings. They were buzzing around the various tree lines, searching for something. The shielder shot up like a rocket, knocking me over in its wake. It raced over to the wreckage and pulled out guns. It turned toward me, staring with dark purple eyes. It looked back to the ships, disregarding its pain and my presence. One ship turned the other way, while the other flew straight towards us. Without missing a beat, the shielder yelled out in slurred English, "Get on the other side of the ship and hide." It fired one of the guns as I ran to my designated place. Surprised by the noise, I tripped and fell, landing on my right side. I scrambled to get up, but stopped. Paralyzed by the sensory overload, the humming of the Timortian ship grew louder as it picked up speed. I witnessed the shielder take down the ship in 3 shots. "Watch out," I yelled. "The other one is coming back." I pointed to the second ship on the shielder's right. It turned to look at me, wordlessly moving its mouth. The second ship came around too quickly, firing upon the wreckage. The leftover metal exploded. A searing pain clouded my vision. My world went dark. The end.
Well, just the beginning, really, right?
Truly, yes.
So I want to remind everyone we are speaking with Samantha Heuwagen, and that was an excerpt from which book?
Dawn Among the Stars, the first in the Starless series.
So it's a part of a trilogy, or will there be even more?
I just finished the fourth, so there are 4 books, much to everybody's excitement, but the 4th book won't be out until next year sometime.
And these are classified as science fiction novels, but I heard the word Lansing and Michigan in there, so I want to tell everyone that you are from Michigan, although you're now currently in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yep.
It takes place here in Michigan. Do all the stories take place in Michigan?
100,000,000,000,000,000,000%. I love Michigan. I know I don't live there any longer, but it will always have a place in my heart. And I think when I first wrote the series, I knew Michigan the best because I had traveled a little bit because of grad school and what have you. And so I knew when I was going to write a story that it was definitely going to take place in Michigan. And what I love about the series, and I'm not a planner by any mean when I write, but I love the series because it starts in Detroit, then it moves across the state, then it goes up north, and then a little bit of a baby spoiler, but I think you guys will understand. It ends up in Mackinac Island, which I think is really fun.
Oh, that is fun. And when does this take place? What
I mean,
year?
around this time, I'm kind of vague. I have a few dates thrown in the series, like the coming of aliens became public knowledge on June 19th. So it just depends. Yeah, I'm gonna say around this time.
Excellent, excellent. So these are science fiction novels taking place around now in modern times here based in Michigan. Um, but I want to tell everybody, or I should let you tell everybody, what
Sure.
you do for a living and then ask how that plays into your story. So you're a therapist, but I think it'd be
Yeah.
best for you to tell everyone what kind of therapist and what's your
Yeah.
typical day like.
Yeah. So I'm very lucky that while I was in grad school, I have two master's degrees. I have one in women and gender studies, and I have one in marriage and family therapy. And so I am a licensed marriage and family therapy here in the great state of Georgia. But my background is in women and gender studies, which kind of gave me the idea to write as an outlet. So it is a feminist science fiction series. So I look at multiculturalism, intersectionality, positionality, all of that. And I'm very, very excited because as a therapist, that definitely involves, it's so important to my work. Like, I don't think I could be a therapist without those ideals. And so for me, while I was in grad school, I needed an outlet that wasn't working with clients and it wasn't just writing academic papers because writing academically is completely different than fiction writing. And so my bright idea was like, I'm just going to start writing for fun. And I kept having this reoccurring dream about aliens and the destruction of Earth and what would that do to people's mental health. 2020 gave us a little baby taste of what it could be like. I truly believe that the series goes even further into what I believe as a therapist, what we would see if some life altering, earth shattering event happened that impacted all of us. And so my day to day is I do work with clients. I have my own private practice here in Atlanta, Georgia. But when I am not with clients, I do manage my time. So there are a couple of days during the week that I do fully dedicate myself to writing. My outlet is writing. So not only do I work with clients in person, but some people can't work with me. As it goes, as a therapist, you are licensed in the state, at least in the United States, I should say, in the United States, you are licensed in the state that you work. And if you are not licensed in another state, so unfortunately, I can't work with anyone in Michigan at the time because I'm not licensed in the state of Michigan. There are many people that reach out to me via social media and they want to work with me, but I just ethically cannot do it. So my work in writing, because there's other books that I have coming and other articles that I write, is my way of making mental health and therapy accessible for people who can't work with me one-on-one in the therapy room.
That's great. That's great. So yeah, because you can reach out to the whole world with your stories and your articles and your website, and you can help people
Yeah.
by your writings. For
Yes.
those that can't see you professionally in person in the state of Georgia, um, how does the relationships? And I have to think that um, one of the most interesting things that we can experience as humans is relationships
Yes.
with other people. And you
Yes.
explore that in your novels, but of course, help people with that in your professional life.
Yeah.
Um, are there situations in your professional life that lend itself into or weave itself into your writing and you try to explore that?
It's a really good question. Thank you so much for asking because it is an amazing question. Now, I can't say that everything that happens in the therapy room directly comes into my work publicly because that just wouldn't be ethical either. But I will say the themes of healthy relationships, that is definitely interwoven into my series because I found not only do I do therapy, but I have also I've taught, I teach at on the university level and I do well, now it's webinars because we can't do anything in person, but workshops and what have you. And one of the biggest themes that come out is people not understanding what healthy relationships look like. And so I know, as an avid reader myself, I get really annoyed, and this is the therapist bias, if you will, when I read romance or I read books with love interests or relationships, and they're never really healthy. Like, I think Twilight a little bit is really unhealthy, and 50 Shades of Grey, don't even get me started on that. And I just wanted to add to the conversation about healthy relationships, not have examples that are just not functional. So there's a lot of communication. There's a lot of, I mean, there's drama. You can't write a story without drama, but they work through the drama in a healthy way. And if they don't work through it, there's a reason. And the reason comes up, and people are navigating that to the best of their ability in a healthy way. What's fun for me is, and this is just a little tidbit that I'm gonna give y'all, is that this series doesn't have a therapist in it. Now, it's probably because I am a therapist and I didn't want people to be like, oh, there she is, she put herself into the series. I wanted people to make comments about how it would be nice to have a therapist. It would be nice to have a healthy outlet for mental health, because they're still fighting for their lives. There's, reconstruction, if you will, of Earth as itself. And so what would that do to mental health? And that's kind of the question that stays throughout the entire series, is what is healthy relationships on that intimate level? So are people still finding love? Are people still in their family systems? And then what does that look like societal wise? And I have a really good time kind of navigating that and figuring it out.
Well, that's wonderful. So you explore the healthy relationships, and there's some romance and drama, I imagine.
Yeah.
Are there sex scenes in your stories?
Okay, so one of the things that I failed to mention earlier is that I am also a certified sex therapist. So a lot of my work revolves around helping people with their sexuality, couples, people who are questioning what's going on, trauma survivors. I would be the world's worst sex therapist if I did not try my hand at a healthy sex scene. And so another message that I love about this series, and that I was really hyper focused on bringing to life in some way. Again, I don't plan these things, but I knew I wanted to incorporate it in some way that made sense, is consent. And so a lot of conversations when there are sex scenes, or when people are thinking about coming together in that way, you see it done in a beautiful consent filled way that I think people can actually use and learn and bring to their own lives. Because a lot of people think of consent and they're like, that is just so, not sexy. That is just so, like, that's a lot of work. And I show through the characters how it can be done where everybody feels safe and welcomed and relaxed. So yes, there's sex, and I'm very proud of that fact, because again, taking what I do in the therapy room and bringing it to the masses outside of the therapy room. So I'm very happy about that.
Well, that's got to be an interesting way to find some creative juices to bring from your life into that, and you actually know what you're talking about. So
Yes.
I hope that they are better than Twilight or 50 Shades of Grey, because
Yes, well, I work with a really amazing team that keeps me honest. So I know in the second book, Fading Starlight, there is more of a traumatic episode or scene, if you will. And so I knew that it was going to be difficult to read as a reader. So what I did is called upon some of my other therapist friends, had them work with me. I'd write the scene and they would help me, basically better read / edited, to make sure it wasn't going to, traumatize the reader, but educate the reader. And so I take my time, using research-based methods, if you will, to make sure I do write scenes that make sense, and I do write things that will not traumatize but will educate, because that's my goal as an author, is not to just add to the chaos, it's to help navigate it.
oh, that sounds great, because so many times I think some writings include a shock value, or and let's face it, life can be dark and have uncomfortable
Yeah.
situations, and there is certainly a time and place to educate people that there is this part of life.
Right.
But it sounds like you're taking a very healthy approach,
Thank you.
in a more positive attitude direction with it, because there's a lot of learning that can be done the positive way.
Yeah. Thank you. I think a lot of authors try their hand at traumatic, like real, almost like realistic depictions of trauma. So sexual assault, for example, and what they get wrong. I still only say this because I'm a therapist and this is my job, right? But I think what authors tend to do incorrectly is focus on just the survivor. They only focus on that one person, saying that the event only impacted the one person. And Fading Starlight does the opposite, because it's not just about the one person. It has happened to one person, but then there are other people close to them that can experience secondary trauma, or their own traumas can be triggered. And so I looked at it as a communal effort. Everyone was impacted in some way, and not just the individual. And I think if we can all as a society switch that mindset, we would all be in a better place.
You bring up a curious question about that. And that's true, right? We've got the victim and the support group around the victim, and maybe not necessarily a support group, but colleagues and people, coworkers and fellow students, or whatever the situation may be, that are brought into this victim's life because of this experience. Do you touch on what happens to the abuser after one of these experiences, what goes through his or her mind?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I didn't want to. So one of how do I don't want to give too much
We
away, but I will.
certainly don't want to glamorize it, right, in
No,
any
and
writings,
I
but
don't. I think the way that I want to answer your question is yes, but it doesn't excuse the behavior. We understand it, we see it, but again, it does not excuse it. Nobody's happy with it. Nobody's just like, oh dang it, like that happened. Not at all. People use it as, I almost did that thing again where I almost touched the earpiece and my hair. So they didn't do that again. But it is not a joke. It is not something where I pass by very willy-nilly. It actually unfolds throughout the series. We get the information, but we should not sympathize with the abuser at all. If
well,
that
yeah,
answers your question without
yeah,
giving it away.
I agree with you. But I've never thought about, and thankfully, I've never had to think about what goes through an abuser's mind. Um, and I'm sure it ranges across the spectrum. Some people are narcissistic and maybe never think about it again.
Well, it's always about power and control. And I think that's what the series tries to examine, is like, what does that mean, power and control? Because we throw these words out, but we don't see it enacted in like a realistic sense that would kind of explain away why things happen. But again, it doesn't glorify it. It's not like, oh yeah, that's what happened and we don't care about it. We're like, no, that's awful. What can we do to change this?
Wonderful. Moving in back to the science fiction part of it, because I love science fiction.
Yeah.
Aliens.
Yeah. So fun.
It's a fun topic. Do you draw from any personal experiences or belief structures you have?
Well, I'm bilingual. I speak English fluently and I speak Spanish fluently. And one of the things that I play around with aliens is culture and language. And so again, Tolkien's really good for like being known as making up a language and going with it, but he created maps. So his focus was more about like the terrain and how cultures would develop from the terrain. For me, I did it backwards, if you will. I started with an idea of culture and language and how language would impact the understanding between humans and these different races of aliens, because there are multiple races of aliens in the series. And so for me, I don't think I've met an alien. I mean, maybe, like, I'll be open to that. I have no idea. But I've always imagined if I did, there would be a language barrier. And I think science fiction is really notorious for being like, let's use technology to explain away the language barrier. And the different isms that we use to explain stuff, like colloquialism in American English is huge. Like, as somebody who speaks two languages, there's times where I'm like, what does that mean? What does that say? There's a new saying. What does that new saying mean? Then you have to do research and figure it out. And so somebody who just rolled up to this planet and decides that English is the main language, though I don't think that is. I think Spanish is the most spoken language in the world. If I might be incorrect with that, but we'll just go with that for now. An alien rolls up and goes English, there's still going to be so much that they don't understand. The syntax might be different. And so I play with language, and that's what I'm really, really excited about. One of the ways I visually do that in the story is they don't use like isn't, they would say is not, instead of cutting down words like Americans are really notorious for doing. So I just love science fiction for that, because I think that's so interesting. No one's just going to roll up and understand Earth, and where are they landing in Earth? Because every culture and every continent and country is so different and diverse. So that's something that I loved playing with in the series.
Well, and I think you're onto something, and we all know that because of our attention span and 44-minute formats for an hour TV program doesn't lend itself to be able to not have aliens and humans communicate.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So if you're watching
right,
it in America, everyone speaks English. If you're watching
right,
it in France, everyone speaks French. It's just the translation that they've made it to be able to story
right,
tell. And that's fine
right.
for an entertainment value. But in
Sure.
literature, we get to be able to be a little more in depth.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and again, going back to your professional life of relationships, is that, I have a extremely good partner. She and I communicate quite well. We've been together a long time, but there are moments that in any healthy relationship, you wonder, what language are you speaking? Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
English. We've communicated for years, yet there are times that communication fails. And that's with two people that are intimate and close and speak the same language. I can't
Right.
imagine what it's like for people that are trying to bond, that are multicultural,
Yeah.
multilingual,
Yeah.
coming from different places, let alone bringing in the alien component. So
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah. Yeah. So there that's where I think some of the drama, at least for me, unravels in the series, is because we've got the shielders or the Lemursians. They have two different names depending on where you are. And they have a little bit more vulnerable, empathetic culture, but then they have these really strange, rigid rules depending on what's called rank. And so you have to navigate that as a human who's just like, what is that? Like, are you like, who's the king? Is there a queen up in here? There's not. But like, we're trying to use our own sense of the world to understand a whole different culture that has completely different rules that are so different than anything on Earth. And then we do have some aliens that get left behind on Earth with the survivors of Earth, and there's like all kinds of different things that get thrown in their way, language wise, culturally. There's a gift given that is have huge significance on the alien home planet Seleucia, and it just everything kind of falls apart and becomes an issue. But I find that stuff so fascinating because, again, going back to my main mission, which is what is a healthy relationship? How do people work past their differences to get to the other side? And that might be that they end up together, that might be that they don't, and if that's okay or not. So I definitely had a good time bringing that to life on the page.
well, with the time we have left, could you give a couple tips for anyone struggling in any relationship, whether it be a work relationship, a friend relationship, or a romantic relationship, maybe what they can
Yeah.
do to improve that?
Yeah, so it's obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic and there's a lot going on in terms of chaos and stress and uncertainty. One of the things that I'm very passionate about as a therapist is making sure we have a foundation within ourselves that's being taken care of. And that's called self-care, which is a beautiful, it's not this wellness idea where you have to go buy something and like have a bubble bath and have a face mask or whatever. I'm not saying that. Self-care really begins from taking the time to figure out what you need, what are the needs, wants, desires, perhaps resources that you're lacking. And so in order to give to other people, you have to make sure your foundation and your love tank, if you will, is full. So it's taking time for you, whether that be going for a run if you're a runner, or working out in whatever way, moving your body in whatever way, making sure you're fed, watered, if you will, taking time. Like I've definitely have been switching my version of self-care personally and professionally to include time management, because we're all spending so much time at home. It gets a little boring. And so you want to make sure you can divide your time to give back to yourself and the people that you live with. And so if you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, there are still therapists now that are still taking clients and working with clients, whether that be virtually or in person. In Georgia, we can still see people in person, and so a lot of my caseload is in person still, but I take safety precautions as much as possible. But then there's also telemental health, that I think is a really beautiful option for people who are interested in therapy, bringing their partner along, but being in the safety of their own home. Now, on the flip side, because of the nature of what I do, that's why I still see people in person, because people are like, I cannot talk to you about the things that I want to talk to you about with my partner in the other room. So I'm like, all right, bring your mask, come on into the office, let's go. And so it's really about self-care, knowing that therapists are still out there, still working, still interested in helping you in any way, shape, or form that you need. And then I would also volunteer myself. I have helped a lot of people that I don't work with personally find therapists in their area that makes sense for them. So please visit samanthaheuwagen.com, reach out to me, send me an email, shoot me an Ask a Therapist message on my website. I'd be more than happy to offer you referrals or resources for you to find a therapist in your neck of the woods, because there's a lot going on, and we might need to bring somebody into the picture to help us navigate these strange times and maintain healthy relationships.
We all need help now and again, and our family and friends can't always fill that gap. Uh, when it comes to your books, is there a
Yeah.
place that you want to send everyone to find out more about you being an author and maybe purchase your science fiction novels?
You can still head to samanthaheuwagen.com. I am the only Samantha Heuwagen in the world. So if you don't know how to spell my last name, I'm sure it's like posted somewhere. But if you start searching Samantha and the HEU, I come up. I'm the only one. But these books are available wherever books are sold. So if you like Barnes and Noble, head over there. If you like Amazon and the Kindle, head over there. My personal fave, because I do have an iPhone, is iBookstore. It's easier to read on my book as I go, or read on my phone the book that I am reading as I go, or between clients, if you will, for my self-care. So wherever you get your books, I'd love you to pick up all three books. We've got Dawn Among the Stars, Fading Starlight, and Stardust Emerging. And then, as a little treat for you guys, the fourth book, I haven't released the name yet, but I'll tell you, it's In the Wake of Stars. And that comes out, I believe, the end of next year. But don't quote me on that, because I'm not sure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Samantha Heuwagen, science fiction author and relationship therapist, coming to us today from Atlanta, Georgia, but a Michiganian by
Yes, always and
nature.
forever. Yep, always
And
and forever.
and I hope that you get a chance to come back to Michigan when we're a little more open and travel is a little more accessible. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for joining us today
Thank you
at
so
this.
much.
You're welcome. The second annual virtual Authors Fair continues in a moment.